Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to class for our last lecture. In this lecture on motivation, I'll focus on two of the four F's, affiliation and what we'll politely call fornication. Humans are social animals, and the need to belong to a group is primal to us. We survive in groups historically. Overwhelmingly, we don't have the ability to go survive out there in the woods on our own without any help from anyone else. And there are some people who have managed to survive on their own in the woods for a very long time, but even if you found the means to do that, you might end up being miserable or losing your mind from the loneliness. So social animals like humans have a fifth F, and I'll call that affiliation. And the most important predictors of happiness are about relationships. It's ironic that we sacrifice our relationships in order to pursue things like, career in the workplace. And perhaps we hope that by piling up achievements and getting status and impressing people, that will end up meaning more love in the end, but that's not really how high quality relationships work. And people who play that game can end up, very lonely at the end of their lives. Feelings of love and acceptance activate the brain's reward system in a way that's similar to, say, food. And the experience of social exclusion is registered in the brain's pain centers, right? Just like physical injury is. And social isolation is associated with poor outcomes, right? Poor mental and physical health. Social support is a really important predictor of well-being. We can get a sense of people's interpersonal relationships by looking at the amount of space that they put between each other. These are general observations. People in, say, professional context tend to stand further apart than people in a family context, but they will shake hands, and technically that's intimate distance, but it doesn't signify an intimate relationship. It's just a part of business culture. So I think we do less of that since COVID. If you want a more intimate relationship with someone, or someone wants a more intimate relationship with you, one of you might step into the other person's space. Okay, so that person might step into your personal space. And if you feel comfortable, maybe you'll reciprocate and get in theirs too. If people feel uncomfortable, they try to maintain the distance, and you'll notice them kind of pull back. That's good body language to watch out for. Stepping into somebody's space is a socially dominant action. Usually the person who has more power in a relationship initiates that. So your boss will pat you on the back before you ever touch him like that, right? So people who are in close relationships, or very close relationships, will get right up to each other. Okay, so you've been close to your family members like that. Maybe you hold hands or hug. My best friend and I will sit right up next to each other when we watch a movie, and she'll sort of lean on me, and that's all fine because it's appropriate, because that's a very close relationship. Right? But it wouldn't be appropriate for me to sit that close to one of the professors here. In that case, I'd want to keep about a meter away. Right? Maybe even more. They're saying 1.25 meters. I've been too close. You can ask what predicts who makes friends with whom. Right? What determines interpersonal attraction? Well, a really big factor is just proximity. Robert Zions did a study on friendships in university undergraduates, and he found that people who were friends were disproportionately likely to be living close to each other in residence, right? Like their roommates or their rooms really close to each other, but they're less likely to be friends with somebody, one floor up or one floor down or in another building. So proximity is a major prediction of friendship. Maybe you end up being friends with a person that you sit next to in class, okay, or with that person that sits at your same table in the cafeteria, or who lives in your neighborhood. It's normal to end up being friends with the people who are around you right now, like who are part of your physical landscape. When you're in high school, your group of friends are probably in high school too. And then maybe you part ways and you go to different universities. And now you get a new friend group at your university. And maybe you try to stay in touch with your old friends, but the trend is that people tend to grow apart. So if you want to maintain those old high school relationships, you have to go out of your way to do so, right? To make an intentional decision to reach out to that person, right? To call them up on the weekend, ask them how they're doing, make an arrangement to go out together, because you're not going to have those spontaneous meetings that you have with your friends on campus. Similarity is another predictor of friendship. Similarity is about the extent to which we have things in common with each other. You and your friends probably share similar values, right? If you didn't, you wouldn't get along, right? You probably have similar interests. So there's things that you can do together, subjects you can talk about together. You likely have common experiences that allow you to understand and empathize with each other. And you're probably from very similar demographics in terms of age, gender, class, education, etc. You can see that effect if you look around your university meal hall. You can see that with ethnicity. Look around your meal hall and you'll notice that there'll be like white girls sitting together. There'll be like a group of white guys sitting together. There'll be a group of, international students who are Muslim sitting together. There'll be a group of Black students sitting together. Reciprocity it's a norm. If people are nice to us, then we'll probably be nice to them, right? If we like them, they'll probably like us. If somebody doesn't like you, well, you don't like them either. If they help you, you'll help them. So if you want to have a relationship with somebody, be nice to them, and maybe they'll be nice to you. Ostracism refers to social exclusion. It results in real pain. Think about the words that people use to describe social rejection. They all say that they feel slapped in the face, they feel punched in the gut, right? They feel heartbroken, they feel sick to their stomach. I'll use language that describes physical illness or injury. That's how we register it. It's registered in the same part of the brain that we register physical pain. And interestingly, acetaminophen, Tylenol, works to lessen social pain, right, as well as physical pain. So if you feel punched in the gut by somebody, but you weren't, Tylenol might still help with that. It also shows up in other ways. It doesn't just hurt a person. It can lead to changes in their behavior. It can, somebody who's felt hurt might become less empathetic. It could reduce their performance. They could get hostile in return. There's a norm of reciprocity. And sometimes people get caught in negative spirals. I don't like the way they say disagreeableness there, as if that were a bad thing. That's a personality trait, and I don't think that it's necessarily a bad personality trait. Some people, stand up for themselves and others and call that disagreeable. Okay, but it takes all kinds to make a world. All right. You might wonder why people exclude and bully others when it's not a nice thing to do. Well, it answers to their instincts and their motivations, maybe to their fight motivation. Um, Aggression and exclusion wins resources, right? For you and your kin at the expense of others. But human groups have competed historically. It's not like we've always been one happy family and are now. Okay. People have a fight instinct for dominance. I find psychology is quite a power blind discipline, and we just tend to not talk about power, even though it's really important in social relationships and social psychology and human organizations. And I've also noticed that in chapters on motivation, they'll talk about the food, they'll talk about the sex, but they always skirt the issues of fight and flight, right? Of dominance and submission. Tend to not talk about that. And I wonder if it's because the discipline tends to be represented by people who are kind of on the top of the pecking order, and so maybe they don't want to see it. Anyway, so people do have a fight instinct for dominance. Some people have a fear instinct, maybe more submissive or agreeable. People who perpetrate aggression, like bullying, or demonstrating their power and their position in a social hierarchy or pecking order. I think they're demonstrating they can peck and that someone else can get pecked. And that feeling of having status, of having power, of being on top of the world, of being respected, of having people ingratiate themselves with you, like that is rewarding, and particularly rewarding for some folks. I see a comment in the chat. Just for interest's sake, ostracism comes from the Greek words ostrika, which were the pieces of pottery used to vote to expel any citizen or politician from the city-state. Ostracism was a very severe form of punishment. It's like the worst thing ever, right? To be excluded from your community. And in some places, it was a punishment worse than death, right? Like it would be better to be killed by your own people and buried in their graveyards with their rights than to be cast out. That's the worst thing. All right, we'll go on to one of the other key Fs, the ones that intro psych textbooks like to focus on. In general, straight men are more sexually motivated than straight women. That's a cross-cultural finding. It's a sort of average difference. There'll always be, some women that have higher sex drives than some men. But on average, men are more sexually motivated. Women, heterosexual women, tend to be quite choosy maters. They say no a lot more and tend to select for men's ability to provide, like for strength and social status. It's an interesting study where they showed heterosexual men and a picture of a woman in a car. And in one case, she was in like an expensive car, and in another case, she was in like a cheap car. And their ratings of her attractiveness did not depend on the car at all. But when they showed heterosexual women a picture of a man in like a kind of basic car versus a luxury car, they thought the man was more attractive when he was in the more expensive car. So one might expect that would lead heterosexual men to put in some effort, right, to get that approval or attention or that interest, maybe working more demanding jobs to get higher pay to get that nice car, right, or to cover the bill at the expensive restaurant. These are some online comments I found from straight guys who are describing things that they've done to go and get the attention of a woman. And there's a good example here of very high sexual motivation in the comment from the person who had who went so far as to pierce his own nipples, like very painfully, in order to satisfy a mere whim. And now I'm turning my attention back to the chat, and there's a question about the last slide, which was on bullying. So I can understand what you said about bullying as far as resources and stuff are concerned, but in, say, the modern day schoolyard, what do people gain from bullying? The schoolyard, the modern day schoolyard refers to an organization, right? There's an organizational context of the school. And then workplace bullying is endemic. You're not going to see the last of that in junior high. And workplace bullying also happens in organizations. And organizations are systems, and there are systems that reward people for engaging in bullying. And then you can also have systems that prevent it, and they prevent that through their policies, the way they handle reporting, the way they train people, and just generally their culture. When I was in the schoolyard in the 1990s, schools sort of saw bullying as normal, and they didn't really want to deal with it, and they'd brush it off and dismiss it, which is the way a lot of workplaces are like. And there ended up being suicides, and that was an issue, and there was litigation, and then the schools were motivated to do something about it. So what the person who bullies gets out of it depends on the system that they're in. Okay, and they might just sort of like the power trip as well. Like if, I'm sure you've had an experience of having a teacher unnecessarily power trip on you. I can't be the only one that's had that happen. There are different kinds of bullying: physical, verbal, social. Physical bullies and verbal, instead of using the label bully, I'm going to say people who bully, because we can all take those different roles in our lives of target, of witness, of perpetrator. People who characteristically perpetrate verbal and physical bullying tend not to go far in professional life. However, people who engage in social bullying do. So if you are, maybe in junior high, especially if you're female, you might have had an experience of being the subject of gossip and rumors and little setups and shenanigans to try to make you break down emotionally in front of people. The people who do that, well, they're disproportionately likely to end up being your managers. Okay, so that kind of middle school bullying can become an issue again in the workplace. But since management makes the rules, you might not be able to report that, and reporting that can lead to retaliation. So have to keep quiet and deal with it. It's more of an issue in some fields than in others, because different professions have different occupational and organizational cultures. It's an issue in academia. There's a lot of that, unfortunately. It can be an issue in nursing as well, and in teaching, and in the military. Back to sexual motivation. You'll recall that Freud believed that there were two fundamental motivational forces. Actually, I'm going to stop myself right now. I think your textbook talked very little about Freud, so I'll tell you. Sigmund Freud believed that there were two fundamental motivational forces in people. One was eros. That's the life instinct, and it's associated with the libido. And then thanatos, and that's your instinct for death and destruction. And these terms correspond to ancient Greek gods. And you might remember this character, right? Psyche from the first lecture, the namesake of psychology. Right? Her whole motivation in life is, to get through her trials, is to get back with her boyfriend, right? To unite with her boyfriend, Eros. That's Cupid. So in Freud's mind, the sex drive is the fundamental life energy. And I imagine that, to come up with an idea like that, maybe he was pretty horny. Freud believed that the basic sexual impulse could be managed in socially appropriate ways, by like redirecting it or channeling it towards more socially acceptable behaviors or greater cultural goals, like art. It's called sublimation. This is a statue that is down the street from me right now at Dalhousie University. It's called the Marine Venus, and you have to wonder what was the sculptor thinking. You could say that the ties are a phallic symbol. At golf, right? It's using a club and balls to get into holes while admiring the beautiful undulating landscape. Well, what's that really about? Freud would say that those are expressions of the libido. Sexual behavior has a lot to do with hormones. And you look at kids or kittens, they're just not interested in that. And then puberty hits, and wow, they're interested. Okay. Hormones are chemical messengers that your brain uses to affect your organs and behavior. They work more slowly than, say, neurotransmitters. Both men and women have testosterone and estradiol. Men have more testosterone, okay, women have more estradiol. And there are psychological effects and physical effects of these hormones. There is an observation that testosterone increases aggression, but it's a bit more complicated than that. I'd say it's more about dominance, more about winning. There was a study that found that, or they injected men or women with testosterone before a game that required friendliness and cooperation. And in that context, the shot actually functioned to make the person friendlier and more cooperative, which is what they needed to do in order to win. Aggression is one way to win, and it often works when push comes to shove, as they say. As for estrogen, which comes in several forms like estradiol, this levels of estrogen vary over the course of the reproductive cycle, which is monthly in humans. And female mammals are kind of sexually receptive at certain parts of the cycle and then not at others. If you've had a cat that's not fixed, and you know that the cat's like not interested, and then when it's in heat, it's like it's on, and that's all it can think about. Um, Human females are not like that. There's more plasticity in behavior, but in most mammals there are heat cycles. Their estrogen is also associated with mood swings. Women do have more unstable moods and more mood disorders. So one major way that we differ from other animals is that females are less conspicuous about their fertility, right? It's not like the cat in heat kind of situation. And you might ask, well, is there any adaptive value to that? Right? Why not? Why don't we have heat cycles like other animals? We also have menopause. That's different. Why would we do that? There are many theories or many hypotheses, but they all center on the idea of paternal investment. A classic transaction, and not just humans, but chimpanzees, is the male trading food for sex. Okay, and if the female is open to those kind of transactions throughout the cycle, well, then that's more food for her and more food for her kids. Okay, versus if she were only interested for 3 days a month. And humans are a species that requires, we do have paternal investment. Now compare that to cats, like the tomcat, just, he's gone after the deed is done. It takes a lot more resources to raise a human child. In our very close relatives, the chimpanzees, the males are generally not interested in the females, and it's only when they're in estrus that they get sort of interested. But we talk to each other more than that. All right. These hormones are not always at their same levels as people age. Hey, testosterone levels drop, estrogen levels drop, and men and women actually become more alike to each other. The biggest differences in sort of in these gendered behaviors happens during what would be the classic childbearing years. And children, boys and girls, are quite similar to each other psychologically. And then a lot of these changes take place at puberties. And then, some people have surgery or on medications that cause them to lose their sex drive. And there's some people who just don't have a sex drive, right? Some people are asexual. Not all men are attracted to women, and not all women are interested in men. The majority of people cross-culturally are heterosexual, like that is the norm. However, across all cultures, there's a minority that are homosexual or bisexual or have even other orientations beside that. And we see that in the animal kingdom too. Overall, men tend to have a bit more rigid patterning. So gay men tend to kind of stick to gay men. Generally speaking, women show a bit more fluidity in their gender identity, in their sexual behavior. If you know somebody that uses they, them pronouns, I'm going to say chances are that person was a female at birth. Question in the chat, does asexuality have to hormone, or does it have to do with hormones? Does that mean that the other sexualities have something to do with hormones? I'm pretty sure that hormones would be involved. Like people can, even become asexual after, let's say, having, sometimes people have to something like testicular surgery, and that changes the way they feel. There's a question from Ugachku. Is it true that all men have a bisexual tendency? There was a sex researcher named Kinsey, and he thought that everyone was really kind of a little gay. There's a difference between sexual orientation and sexual behavior. So a man can have an orientation, let's say, to women, but also for other reasons, maybe opportunistically, maybe because he's in a boarding school, engage in homosexual behavior. So in many cultures across history, homosexual people have been closeted and they've entered into relationships, heterosexual relationships, because that was like the socially expected thing to do. So one can have a fully heterosexual tendency and still, for other reasons, whatever they might be, engage in homosexual behavior. And then, there is a population of men who are bisexual. But I wouldn't say that, I don't know if we could say that, like, all men have I suppose they all have the capacity for homosexual behavior. That I wouldn't say that means they all have a bisexual orientation. You might wonder, how does sexual orientation develop? And it looks like it's pretty biological, pretty genetic. If there's an influence of nurture, it looks like it's in really early life in terms of the effect of hormones on the developing brain of the fetus. So, and this is supported by, twin studies. It says here, behavioral differences observed in early life. I have noticed that both intro psych textbooks that I've read tend to mix up sexual orientation and gender identity. They're not the same thing. So when they're saying behavioral differences observed in early life, they're getting at the idea that, the person might have a queer gender identity. That's not the same thing as a sexual orientation, although there's, definitely a correlation between having a queer gender identity and having a homosexual orientation. It does seem to run in families. A man is more likely to be gay the more older brothers he has, and that's probably something to do with the prenatal environment, right? And how well the mother's body, or how the mother's body reacts to the testosterone produced by the male baby. The fact that there are these differences seem so hardwired means that there's no benefit to conversion therapy. Right? Some people think that you might put a gay person in therapy and they'll talk through it and end up straight. Like, no, that doesn't work. So orientation isn't really a choice. And there are some people that, have orientations to, that aren't even to people, like orientations to things. And they'll say that, they've always been like that, and that, they first realized that, they were attracted to suitcases. I don't know, like when they hit puberty. There are also some brain differences. One classic difference, like a gender difference, and remember they're confounding gender identity and sexual orientation, but there's a correlation. Men are better at rotating objects in their minds. Object rotation has something, I don't know, maybe it's a testosterone thing, I don't know. There's a difference in the size of one of the brain regions associated with visual spatial ability, but I can't remember what the name of that structure is. Anyway, so you can see on this graph that straight men kind of have better performance on this than straight women on this object rotation task, but that gay men and gay women, now this is what they're really getting at here is probably queer gender identity, have scores that fall in the middle. So this kind of research finds that queer people or kind of homosexual people tend to have psychological traits that fall in between what we've observed for heterosexual men and heterosexual women. And there's a comment from Michaela in the chat. One of my past psychology courses said this might have to do with gendered activities, like with environment, with boys playing more video games in childhood. And so a good researcher would ask, well, are boys choosing to play those games? Like, are boys drawn to play with, I don't know, guns and toys and those classic boy toys, right? Because that gets their interest. And, are girls just sort of naturally drawn to play with stuffies and dolls and that kind of thing? I'll speak as a parent, like I have a daughter. She seemed, I didn't raise her with any kind of gendered expectation like she had. There was boys and girls clothes. She has a sort of gender neutral name, and all girl. Right? When she was about like 2, she happened to see something haphazardly playing on TV that was like a woman in a poofy dress doing something ultra feminine, and she was just like obsessed, and she'd go for these like floofy pink type things and put them on and stare at herself in the mirror. And I was like, oh, that looks really biological. I didn't do that. I didn't teach her to do that. There might be, maybe there's more research on this, but it's hard to do controlled research with other people's children. Maybe you can't. Then there are people who, have attractions to non-human objects, right? Like things like balloons. Somebody married a briefcase. Somebody married the Eiffel Tower. Somebody else who married I'm sure these aren't legal marriages, a railway station. Some people are attracted to causing like suffering in others or in themselves. That's a reference to sadism or masochism. And some people want to have relationships with non-consenting people, like children, or people who are not alive. Those are called paraphilias, and most people with paraphilias are male. The most common paraphilia is the foot fetish. That's relative to these other potential paraphilias, they are sounds pretty tame. Foot fetishes can be an issue in relationships if he's all about the foot. Okay, so you have to remember that there's a person that's attached to the foot that also wants to be included. The cause is not known. They're not considered a problem unless they cause harm. Pedophilia is a problem because children can't consent and they probably don't want to be in a sexual relationship. But now you'll remember this guy, right? We saw that guy. I won't play it again because we played it before in class, but Nathan had this relationship with his car, Chase, and he thought that Chase had these feelings for him, that he can tell when Chase is having a bad day, and this is our favorite song. So he's projecting all these desires onto Chase and kind of living a relationship with a romantic relationship with him that was like totally in his head because it's a car. But people with pedophilia do the same thing with children. Like they think that they have a romantic relationship with a child, and the child is reciprocating. They might have a childlike characteristic themselves. So kind of one thing if it's an inanimate object like a car, and then it's another thing if it's a child. Necrophilia, well, it offends the families, and it's especially a problem if a homicide is committed to obtain the body. Get that. According to your textbook, sexual orientation is some complex interaction of genetic, biological, social, and cultural factors. I don't really agree with that. I think orientation is pretty hardwired. I would say sexual behavior is a complex interaction that involves more of these social and cultural factors because, in many cultures, you're, not allowed to be gay. So therefore, you will manifest, heterosexual behavior. Your textbook presents a theory, Bem's exotic becomes erotic theory, and I'll be upfront that I don't really buy that one. Bem's idea is that, okay, so let's say you're a little boy and you don't feel like you fit in with the other little boys, so you go play with the girls, and then you become like them, and now you're going to see the boys as mysterious and other, and be attracted to that. I don't know if any of you guys who are gay identify with that. The textbook thought that it, the strength of it was that it looked at environmental factors. We're like, how? No, a strong theory explains the data, and I don't see that one. Just doesn't make sense for me, because if you have a homosexual orientation, you want to be with people who are like you, right? Maybe in sex, maybe in gender, then it's not about being attracted to the opposite. That's what heterosexuality is about. So I don't follow that one. I see a comment in the chat. I tend to fall on the social gender expectations placed on kids as dictating some of those things, whether intentional or not. My son tends to gravitate towards more typically feminine things that are bright and sparkly and exciting. He went to daycare today with sparkles on his face. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see if he changes or stays the same as he gets older. Children who are gender non, there's some study on this. I cannot for the life of me remember the name of the author. But he had found that about 80% of gender non-conforming kids just end up with a queer identity or a homosexual orientation. There's some, this is a slide that I left as is from the textbook. And I highlighted a couple of things I wasn't confident, I don't know, that I didn't love. So they said sex differences in attraction. And they say that males put more emphasis on looks and on youth, whereas females put more of an emphasis on financial resources and having older and more experienced mates. And I highlighted those. Why did I highlight those? What assumptions is this making? In the interest of not, I'm looking at the time and I'm thinking, oh, I have to get through these slides. They're making the assumption that sex means the same thing as gender. Okay, you can have a female sex, like you can be an XX, and a masculine gender identity, and sort of like dress in the way that a guy would dress and have the sort of attitudes and values and interests that are, classically attributed to guys. There's something quite socially located about gender because it's about cultural expectations for how people of the male or female sex behave. And that is culturally located. And they're making, when they say males here, they mean heterosexual cisgender males. And when they say females, they mean heterosexual cisgender females. And if you look at the research that's done with undergraduates, you'll probably find that it's also like class privileged white people too. Okay. There is an evolutionary explanation for this phenomenon, and it's that younger women are more fertile. When they say, well, emphasis on looks, what does that mean? It usually means things that indicate health, like having long, shiny hair, or especially the waist to hip ratio, that curvy hourglass figure. And research suggests that a ratio of 0.7 is quite preferred. That again is an indicator of fertility and sort of ease of childbearing. That said, there are different cultural preferences on what men find attractive in terms of body weight and shape. So that slim hourglass figure is a bit of a Western thing. African men are known to have preferences for bigger women that have a different kind of shape, and there might be an evolutionary reason for that too. Okay, maybe it shows that if you can gain weight and keep weight on you, that you'll survive longer in periods of scarcity and be able to raise the children. I don't know. Evolutionary psychology is very speculative like that. Now, I want to draw your attention to this piece about culture and sexual motivation because it threw me. It's on page 461. Okay, they're saying members of the Akinale society in Brazil don't kiss, but women of the tribe may bite off their lover's eyebrows and noisily spit them to one side. What? Really? Women on the island of Turk go around poking their fingers in men's ears. Anyone here like from the islands of like Turks and Caicos? Is that true? I wanted to know where they were getting this from. And it's from a book by Ford and Beach. Those are two white men, like anthropologists. They wrote the book in 1951. So did they watch this happening? Is this like gossip about the savage indigenous people? If this were true, like I guess people from that tribe the men of the tribe wouldn't have eyebrows because they've been like ripped off their face. I went and Googled this, okay? I couldn't find anything about this Akinale society. However, there are multiple references to this textbook saying this thing. Like it's on Chegg, it's on some note site. So this is, being perpetuated, and I don't know where it's from. And it makes me wonder, like, did they go and visit this tribe? Is this secondhand information? Or what if like they visited the tribe and somebody told them, yeah, that the women here, they like to bite off eyebrows and chew them up during sex. Like that would keep them away from the women, right? So take that one with a grain of salt. I wasn't able to find the full text of this book for free, but I understand that it's like a classic in the area of sex research. Maybe it needs a review or an update. I find that hard to believe. There is research suggesting that average faces get higher average ratings of attractiveness. So in this kind of study, they might present you with an array of faces and they'll ask you to rate, I know, out of 10, how attractive you find the face, right? And what people do is they give, well, on average, give higher ratings to composite faces. A composite face is what happens when you combine two or more other faces. And that creates a face that has like the average nose and the average lips and the average face shape. Yet understanding that, these two people are very similar looking, like white young women. So that research seems to hold up. Why might this happen? Well, maybe it's because somebody with a face that doesn't surprise you in any way has, a lack of genetic mutations that could indicate some difference that maybe have an implication for fitness. So maybe this is like I don't know, making the safest choice of a partner genetically. The textbook does not give you a definition of love. What is love? Something about valuing. If you love an activity, you highly value it. If you love a person, you might value them to the point that you would go out of your way to do something for their well-being. But the text seems to assume that it means romantic sexual love. That's like immediately where they go. And I find that thinking kind of common or automatic in textbooks. Right? Why would we think about love like that? There's also an assumption that passion means lust. So actually, if you go look up passion in the Oxford English Dictionary, that's not what it means. Its primary definition is to suffer. The words passive and passion come from the same Greek root of pasco. It means to be moved by an external force. So if I cast this pen across my desk, oh, the pen is undergoing a passion as it rolls away. And so we are moved by our passions. Our emotions move us. That's why our emotions are passions. And then, like, the eighth meaning of that term refers to lust, because that's can be also an overriding passion. But I think a better understanding of the word passion is being fully engaged in something external, with something external somehow moves us. You can be passionately engaged in an activity. You can be the passionate subject of your pain or your illness. Anyway, so this theory of love has a very specific focus, or the way they think about love has a very specific focus, and it's really to romantic relationships and even heterosexual ones at that. So they Hatfield and Rapson distinguish between passionate love, which involves this lust, really, and then companionate love as love that has come to involve friendship and fondness. I also give you Sternberg's triangular theory of love, and it's hard for me to see that slide, but they'd look at three different factors, like passion. If you're in a romantic relationship, maybe you want some passion. But if you only have that, it's just a relationship of infatuation. And another factor could be commitment. Imagine if you only had commitment, but with no passion or with no sort of emotional intimacy. Well, then you'd kind of have an empty relationship. And then there's intimacy, which is like that friendly part. And maybe you only have intimacy with your friends, but you're not engaged in sort of passionate relationships with. And you could combine two of these things. So let's say that if you have infatuation and commitment, then you'd say you have fatuous love, but you don't really like each other. The combination of all three is, according to Sternberg, consummate love. which he's seeing as an ideal. Any questions about that? It's 10:19. I'll hang around if there's any questions. This is our last lecture. And wow, it's been was it 4 months now? What's coming up next are exams. Makeup exams are tentative. What do I mean by that? They're not in the syllabus, okay? But some students asked me if I would do it, and I was like, yeah, I want to do that for you. I went and looked up the makeup exams that were left by the previous instructor, and I'm not able to use those. Like maybe I could use some like part of them, but what I'm gonna work on today is seeing if I have the resources to pull together a couple of makeup exams. And assuming that I can pull that off, what that would mean is that I would hold the midterm 1 makeup at 9:30 on Monday, and the makeup for midterm 2 at 9:30 on Wednesday. Oh, look, like it says 10th on both. Well, one of those is the 12th, actually. And there would be 50 multiple choice or true or false questions in 50 minutes, unless you have accommodations for extra time. And you can keep whatever grade is higher if you do that. There will definitely be a final exam. It's on Moodle like your other exams. And that one is 2 hours long. And it has 85 multiple choice questions. Please notice the timing. It's at 9 a.m. This is set by the registrar according to the exam schedule. So it's not a class time thing. I know you're used to taking lectures and with me at 9:30. So please remember that it's at 9 a.m. Are there any questions about the exam or exams? You're very welcome, Michaela. Yes, good luck to everyone. And thank you guys. I've had a really good time teaching at Mount A, and I'm grateful for the opportunity. So I appreciated this very much. Now I'm gonna look at Shirley's comment saying, in English societies, we normally follow the idea of love being primarily romantic, but ancient languages have a lot of interesting words for many different kinds of love than we normally consider. For example, I believe there's an old Hebrew word for a kind of love that translates to the lasting love and respect you feel for a first love even years down the line. Oh, wow, that's really interesting. You know, the way we think depends to some extent on our language and the words that we have. There is an effect of that, and it's always fascinating when other cultures have these like words or concepts that we don't quite have in English. Thanks for sharing that. And thanks for your comment. Shirley, I'm glad that you learned and had fun. That's what matters. You're welcome, Benjamin.